We are going to go live now, everyone.
So, John or Steve, go ahead and kick it off.
All right, well, welcome everyone to the first 2021 Community Board 14 Bylaws Committee meeting. Welcome everyone who chose to take part in being in the Bylaws Committee, and welcome to everyone else who decided to sit in, interested in the Community Board 14 bylaws. So on behalf of Jonathan Judge and myself, who are the co-chairs, we're looking forward to a productive process here. The bylaws were last amended, I believe, in 2015. So we've already, in prior meetings, started listing out some potential issues and approaches that we'll get to. I think first on our agenda was appointment of the committee chairperson or chairpersons. So I think right before the meeting started, Sean Campbell confirmed that Jonathan Judge and I would be the co-chairs. So the next item on the agenda is a discussion of process, scope, and timeline for review. Sean, yeah, go ahead.
Before you begin that, there's a question in the chat that asks if there can be a question even before the agenda begins, if you'd like to entertain that.
Sure. So Nikki, did you want to ask your question? Well, Nikki's having trouble unmuting herself. She asked first if she could ask a few sort of context background questions about bylaws in general. All right,
there we go.
unmuted?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I thank you. It's really simple questions. Just because I always like to kind of put like a smaller issue in the bigger picture. I took a look at a few other community board bylaws while I was reading ours, and I was struck by the diversity of bylaws. And so I was just sort of wondering, like, if anybody could give sort of background on, how bylaws get made, if there's any sort of like weird historical context to CB 14's bylaws, like were they particularly controversial? Just anything at all that someone who is a newer board member should know before we dive into this exercise. Are there any sensitivities, things that look banal, but that are truly like a reflection of some sort of historical chat? Like, for instance, CB3 has like crazy stuff about decorum, which leads me to believe they must have a lot of issues with decorum and people cursing one another out at meetings. So just like anything that more experienced board members can share about bylaws in general, and then bylaws at CB 14 that someone's newer to the board should know before we dive into this discussion.
That's a good question. And actually, when I was going through, because I started redlining, like I noticed there were, right after the in the membership section, there was a lot about, removing members, sort of right off the bat. There was a lot of like provisions about that. So I was like, I wonder where, if there were some issues that caused, some attention to those provisions. So I'm certainly not the person to talk about historical, revisions to the bylaws. But Jonathan, I don't know if you wanted to talk about what happened the last time, because I'm certainly curious to hear, what if there were certain things that were focused on and what had happened previously, and because that would be a nice overview to set the stage. And if anyone else afterwards wants to jump in, who has been through this process before.
I was part of the committee that revised them in 2015, so I could answer most of your questions.
Well, I mean,
Jonathan should probably be able to do that as well.
Well, I could just give a couple of background points, I guess, to Nikki's point of like, is there anything particular about Community Board 14 that is reflected in the bylaws? The two things historically were removal for non-attendance. That's always been a sticking point. That's been in the bylaws at least since I think the early 90s, if I remember correctly. And it's also been the point of most contention because enforcement has been very tricky. So there's that. I mean, there's just been a history of people who were appointed to a board but never showed up. And, what were the standards of Community Board 14 to say, hey, if you're a member of Community Board 14, you should show up and partake. And if you're going to miss a lot of meetings, you should have some reasonable excuse. There's been a competing philosophy along the way that said, well, if they provide value of some other kind, maybe by virtue of a position or connections of some kind, and that is actively exercised, like let's say, like Matt Silberman, although I don't think he ever had an attendance issue, but he was at every public hearing advising us on the land use matters. So that was, considered to be like he did more than his fair share, and his attendance at a monthly meeting, which again, I'm not naming him as someone who was absent. I don't think he was. I think he showed up to almost all the meetings anyway. But that would be an example where the board would consider like, okay, well, that person didn't have to attend the monthly meetings in order to meet that requirement. Anyway, so attendance on the board was one thing. The other thing, which we haven't really enforced either, but it was designed to make sure there was diversity of representation, was the breakdown of the regional committees and how that was supposed to factor in to make sure that in deciding on public hearings, who would compose the committee that would hear land use issues in particular areas, that it should be done by regional committee 1, 2, 3, 4, because while we've always had a very diverse community board district, I think one of the most diverse in the city, or at least that was always historically largely true. The idea was that the land use matters would be heard by people who largely live in that particular quadrant of the district, rather than being heard at large by people who may live nowhere near the project in question. We try to use that diversification when it comes to representation on the, I believe it used to be factored into like the nominating committee, used to be factored into all the other committees. But again, that was why that provision's there, but it has not really been enforced very strongly in practice. So that much I could say that I know of that's particular to Community Board 14. So that's a little background I got on that end.
If I can jump in for a second, it's Joe Dweck. 30 years ago, not necessarily definitely not in the bylaws, but as a practice, we have a substantial warning or caveat that we give out at every meeting to disruptors of the meeting. And that came from 1990, Korean boycott issue where the community board was under assault, real assault. We had hundreds of people attending every meeting to disrupt the meetings and to really take it over. And that's where that practice came from. In fact, I don't want to get too far afield, because when we get into the nuts and bolts here, I do want to get rid of those warnings that really seem to take so much time and needlessly, but when we get to it. But that historically, that came from 30 years ago.
I have two comments as well. The first one is, and we kept re-electing Alvin Burke because we loved so much the way he ran the meetings and ran the community board. So when we started to do the bylaws, the underlying idea was that we really cared about how this community board was running, and we wanted the bylaws to reflect the reality of what was happening. The second idea is that many other community boards discuss the important issues at their monthly meeting, whereas we do it always in committee meetings and just have maybe a brief discussion and we vote on things. So we run the board differently than many other community boards. That was the basis of how we went about deciding the language that was put in place in 2015. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
And I'd like to add one thing to it too, Nikki, is that there at the beginning of the borough hall, the current borough hall administration, there was an effort, or at least an exploration, that the borough president was putting forth to try to standardize all of the bylaws of all 18 Brooklyn community boards. And it got a great deal of pushback because boards wanted to assert that you know, the hyper-local nature of the communities results in a hyper-local culture of each board. And boards wanted to maintain their own identities and their own cultures. And so that idea was dropped, but it kind of goes to what you said, you know, why are there's such a diversity of types of bylaws? And I'm sure it does come out of different experiences in different communities, and then the different culture of the boards reacting to those experiences. So I think that the value of each and every board having its own identity was sort of reinforced about, what has it been now, 7 years ago?
That's super, super helpful. Thank you. And then my only other, just if it's okay to ask, is one really boring question, is in terms of the city, do we file these with the city centrally, and do they have any sort of a review process for bylaws? Do they have any oversight process, like where they check in with you? And I really apologize if that's something I should have Googled.
I mean, if it exists somewhere in paper, it doesn't exist in practice. I think we're obligated to keep our bylaws, you know, on record and produce them for the public. I believe we're supposed to have them on our website, which we do. But when I was trying to peruse other boards, I noticed a lot of our sister boards in Brooklyn do not. So I would say that the only time that our bylaws might be called up into a city function is if somebody had a beef and brought it to the city law department, or maybe even to Borough Hall. But there is no sort of standardized, you know, we didn't file our update with any other office. I believe that when Borough Hall was interested in their project, we were asked to provide them all with a copy of our bylaws. So they do have our 2015 bylaws on record, assuming we kept track of them.
Great. All right, thanks. And that was really helpful, those of you who provided some of the history here, because I certainly had similar questions. Before the meeting, Sean sent a document around with bylaws issues. I don't know if everyone had a chance to look at it, but since we're going to discuss process, I figured it might make sense to start talking about possible approaches that we could undertake here, and we could have some discussion based on that. So based on the prior discussion we've had, you know, one approach was, you know, basically a top to bottom review of the entire bylaws document. I had started, you know, just basically like doing a red line. I sent it to Jonathan and Sean. So I had started basically taking that approach on my own, just to see what it would look like. But so that's one possible approach. Another approach is that, you know, we identify specific issues, note specific errors or edits, and any required updates, and then we basically, you know, just try to tackle that set sort of issues. I'd add that in addition to those two possible approaches, based on what we've just said, you know, we could also, you know, take a look at some of provisions that other boards have adopted and see if there's anything that we think might be best practices that we should try to incorporate here. And another idea might be to take a look at the city charter and the city charter revisions and see if we think some of the provisions either should come out or just, you know, reference the city charter. Like, for example, the purposes section, there seems to be, I was looking at the city charter earlier, and it seems like they already cover the purposes pretty well. There's other provisions that seem pretty redundant in what we have in the bylaws. So, you know, there's the option of just referring over to the city charter, especially if there's going to be future revisions. So we're not obligated to, you know, well, not that we're obligated to, but so we don't, you know, feel like the bylaws are out of date, you know, if the city charter gets revised going forward. So I don't know, Jonathan or Sean, if you had any other further thoughts, or if we should enter discussion about those possible approaches.
Well, Steve, just I think in terms of, because I think someone like myself, and certainly you and your background, we could definitely get in the weeds of a lot of that. I would probably just offer like a little parliamentarian sort of just high-level perspective here and saying that the bylaws reflect sort of the heart and soul of the process of how Community Board 14 does work. And so for those of you who don't like know all the nitty-gritty about the law or like little technicalities or points, just think maybe of things that are process-wise that you wonder, could we do better? Something you feel that maybe is left out of a process that maybe we should have as a consensus to change about our flow, about how we do things, how we do business, how we engage with the community. I know there's at least one point about clarifying, I think it's the hiring or the personnel process. I think that's one key thing, which is definitely suitable for bylaws change, so that we're all in agreement on that. So just think of like the big level process things, especially if you've read the bylaws over and you're like, why don't we do those things? Or I don't think this particularly makes sense, or I think maybe this is something that would be a reform that would make better sense. So just think of it as like, how could we do the process of doing business as Community Board 14 better? If there's anything you think that applies to, because certainly I think a lot of us will cover sort of the technical corrections and upgrade the language and some of the more, let's say, mundane but important things. But for the rest of you who aren't that deep into it, you know, it's an opportunity for us to think about how can we make the process of Community Board 14 better for everybody. So that's all I want to add to that.
It looks like Florencio has something to say.
Yes.
Nikki and Glenn both have hands up in the panel.
Yes, I just wanted to ask just a couple of, if anyone considered in reviewing the bylaws, is there any way to make changes? Because it seems as if we're, I mean, I know because of COVID, we kind of went into the virtual world. However, it can be of use, you know, in the future. So I wanted to know if there were anyone considered any addition in regards to that, in regards to, especially to the voting. And, you know, that's one of the questions I had.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate. I think the notion that the bylaw fresh eyes based on the virtual setting, I think is definitely, that's probably on the list of identified issues, I believe. So that's something we should address, you know, during as part of this committee. Agreed.
Okay.
Was there anything else, Florencia?
Oh, well, I guess also in the section that, what section was that? I can't find my notes. I'm so sorry. But when it was, I think, what section was that? Was that 5 committees, or was it the section that talks about quorum? That in the yes, section 7, meetings, and where it states a quorum, but it didn't say exactly what the quorum should be. Whereas when it came to the public hearings, it did specify that it should be 20% of the members of the board. That was D4, but in number 1, meetings 7, meetings 1, it states about the quorum, but it didn't, you know, like try to quantify what the quorum should be. So I just, you know, wanted to know if that was an
Yeah, I think that's,
oversight or.
yeah, I think that's a good point. But
It refers,
go ahead. Go ahead, Sean.
well, it's just that it refers to the administrative code and city charter, which does delineate the quorum to be majority. So it certainly could be spelled out, so it's right there. But should it ever change in the administrative code or city charter, then it would have to be, it would take an update of the bylaws to then adhere to that directive.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point though, because I remember when I was reading, I think when I got to the elections section, I remember like making a comment or noting that it didn't seem to specify like what you know, if I think it might not have specified that a quorum was required or something like that. So we should make sure, you know, with regard to voting and things like that, I think you're right that we're being consistent in the bylaws. So that's definitely something we should keep in mind.
Steve and Sean and Jonathan, but I just wanted to say, I think we should structure this meeting so we don't get to all over a shotgun. I think we should structure it so that we're doing, let's say, one or two paragraphs of the bylaws and stick to that thing. Otherwise, we're going to be running around with our all over the place. I think it needs to be structured so that we all on the same page, literally, and give attention to one thing at a time.
I think that's a good idea. I'm happy to solicit general comments because it's our first meeting. Just and we didn't come in with an agenda saying okay, let's focus on these specific paragraphs for today. So I'm happy to keep it more general for today, and then in future meetings we can specify specific paragraphs. In what Sean sent around, I think towards the back of that there's sections 1 through 4, but those were just preliminary thoughts, and that was just based on basically my comments and edits and Nikki's comments and edits. So I think first we should discuss what the best approach is. Should we go basically, do we want to do top to bottom? It sounds like there are enough issues that maybe that makes sense, but if there are folks who out there who think no, we've been through this before, let's identify issues and tackle the issues. I'm open to that approach, or going section by section, as Joe suggested, might make sense as well.
If I might address,
Steve, I just want to say I concur with that approach. I think this is the first meeting. I think that we have new board members who are not familiar with our customs as much as some other board members are. And so I think it makes sense to sort of just figure out any high-level questions or concerns and catalog them. And then what we can do before we wrap up is triage the ones that we believe are priority, and then we could certainly follow, I think, a much more methodical approach at a subsequent meeting. But I agree with what you said, Steve, on that end of it, and I support that approach.
If I might take off on what Jonathan just said. Now, I've read through it, and I only have 2 or 3 things that I personally have questions about, but I do think the top to bottom approach is probably the best approach, because that way everyone gets familiar with this document. Very few of us, even the ones who worked on it 6 years ago, remember everything. So my suggestion is to go along with your first question, Steve, and that is, how do we go about this? And I suggest top to bottom approach, and just decide at what pace and how to go about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. Anya mentioned in the chat to me that if anyone is unable to unmute, please put it in the chat, and Anya can manually unmute you. All right, so those are just technical issues. So it's happening to everyone. And Anne, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Steve. I'm just curious, would you like us to remain unmuted and await being called upon, or just to jump in? It's not a big committee. It's big enough that we should try to, at least have some sort of order, especially with the virtual aspect. Okay.
That, there's the slight delay, and there's, before you know it, there's 5 people talking at once. But yeah,
that's not why my hand was up, but thank you very much for that. So in terms of the document itself and deference to the state law, city charter, and administrative code, I like the presentation as a matrix or a platform, in the sense that, one, it's accessible to our fellow residents of the community board itself via the website, and 2, it's very user friendly. So if we just defer to these more larger issues, state law, and city charter, and community, when you're talking about purposes, A through E, I think that number 2, page 1, A through E, sort of puts it out there in a very inviting way for people to read it. So I kind of like that part of it. I do have a question about that one section, however. Is New York State law, does that prevail, or does the city charter and the administrative code prevail? Because there's not really much of well, there is a nod to the state law, but does it matter in which order number E under 2E is, should we have state law and then the charter and introduce administrative law? But to that point, we're going back to what Glenn just said and Joe about process. I think Jonathan was suggesting that this is our first meeting. We should delineate which sections we wish to address, as opposed to just saying, all right, let's take it from the top. So I think we need both the macro level, which is fine, but then is it possible to actually achieve something today? Presumably people have read the document. So, so those are my points. Thank you.
Sure. I'm not going to sit here and presume that everyone has read the document top to bottom. That would be great, but I'm not going to hold anyone to that. It's our very first meeting, so just trying to be fair to everyone. I think I hear what you're saying about the purposes and the I guess if there's a potential conflict between the state and the city law, so that's something to consider. So I guess one possibility I was thinking just now, and before maybe someone after I mentioned this can jump in and tell me how it was done 6 years ago. One possible approach would be basically we say, okay, for the next bylaws committee meeting, we're going to address sections 1 through 4, and all of us are going to come prepared to be like, okay, 1 through 4, what do we have to do here? What are our issues? Let's go through them, and to the extent people come out different ways, we'll discuss them at the meeting. 5 through 8 the next time, 9 through 12 the next one, and then that's it. There's, unless if we end up adding sections, that should be the 1 through 12 is the current bylaws. So that's one possible approach. Another one is we take it by topic areas. We in what Sean circulated, there was identified issues, so we could break it down by issues. I guess the problem there is, I think when we start taking a closer look at this, we might identify additional issues. So if we started based on the issues we have now, we'd probably end up tacking some on in the end. So I don't know, like just my initial thought is maybe, what I suggested, but I'm open to other ideas, and I'm certainly open to hearing what the process was last time. My understanding is I think from talking to Sean the other day that the process started in February and ended in June. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know how many meetings that was. So Jonathan or Sean or anyone else, if you want to jump in.
It was 1 a month, but I can't remember exactly how many months. Glenn, John, maybe you do?
No, but what I do remember is that we started at the top. Questions that had to do with the city charter and the state laws were basically answered either by Alvin or by Sean. And the rest of it, we didn't decide how far we were going to go, because you never know when you're going to get to a controversial issue and where you spend a lot of time on it. So we just worked our way down, and after an hour and a half or so, we call it a meeting and then pick up from that spot the next time.
Okay.
Steve, one more thing is I will get this to the committee. I just came across it in a folder that I took out of the office late last week, and I didn't come upon it until last night. But on April 1st, we actually sent a letter to the board that had the changes, and so I could kind of just tell you quickly what they were, because you'll see that there wasn't a huge overhaul. The changes were recognizing the board's involvement in New York State transactions, such as applications to OPWDD or OPWD applications and SLA applications. We updated New York City agency nomenclature, which had changed. I think OPWDD actually was a new one. Recognized the use of committee co-chairs or acknowledge other current board practices. Not sure what that is, but we can go look at it again. We reconciled committee preference and appointment calendar with current board appointment dates, defined the extent of public member participation on topical committees, codified the board's public hearings, and restored relevant portions of sections V, A, H, 3, and I, which had been lost due to a typographic error occurring many years ago. That was it. And then some of the goals that were iterated were maintaining the continuity of the board's existing culture, which Glenn had mentioned at the top of this meeting, acknowledging the importance of public members on board's topical committees, and achieving clarity.
Okay, that's helpful. I want to go through folks who have hands up. So Joanne, you got your hand up?
Hey, good evening, everyone. Yes, I did. I just have a quick suggestion. My suggestion is we sort of approach the revision of the bylaws in phases. Phase one being those that are really most eminent or affect our ability to function virtually. And then that has to do with, you know, quorum and identification of and voting with regards to a virtual meeting. So if we focus on those items first and then bring those to a general meeting for ratification, that might be very helpful on how we function in this new world, because I do believe we're going to be functioning like this to the end of 2021. And then we go to phase two, which is a top to bottom examination of our bylaws and how we can improve them for diversity, inclusion, things that perhaps were appropriate in 2013 that is not working for us right now. And then phase three is just like cleaning things up. And I think if we take the approach of phases and bring them to general meeting, ratifying them as in due course, as opposed to like a lump sum or a bulk, that might be a little bit more appropriate. But I do want us to consider how we function virtually and if the bylaws are working for us, and making sure that we are compliant and working with the community in this new era, which again, as I said, I think is going to go on for way longer than we continue to you know, hope for. So that's my suggestion. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Joanne. I do want to circle back to that, but let's go to the other folks who have hands up. So Carl, see your hand up?
Yep. Hey, folks, can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome.
Hey, Carl.
Yeah. So basically, so you know, wise Joanne basically said what I was thinking too in terms of a potential approach. The thing I want to add to it is, since there's that document that shows the comments that you and Nikki had shared through your review, I'm thinking, hey, on top of Joanne's proposal, could it be possible to map any of those comments and feedback that you and Nikki already have and see if where those fall in, right? Given Joanne's proposal of phases, a potential idea is just seeing the comments that you and Nikki already have, just seeing where that maps. Do those comments map to phase one or phase two or phase three? That's it.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks for that. Anne, you have your hand up, I think.
No.
No, took it down? All right, sorry. Nikki, you have your hand up.
Yeah, and I guess I'm agnostic as to how we choose to review them. Most of my comments did have to do with digital stuff. My one request for this committee meetings is that we use the power of WebEx to like share a screen and actually look at the document instead of, because for me, like I cannot on my tiny laptop do a split screen because of how WebEx works. So just like make full use of the amazing powers of the internet and also using Google Docs to mark stuff up. So if someone, it could be me or anybody, like volunteers to just type as people talk, throw in comments, use suggesting mode. So that's just my other request of this committee.
Yeah, that'll be good. I like that. I like that idea, so I don't have to print everything out and jot them. That sounds like a much better 2021 approach to things. So I think, you know, Joanne and Glenn's suggestion is interesting. I guess, you know, the response, I guess the concern I would have would just with regard to a phased approach would just be that it would probably extend this process and be going back to the full board multiple times with you know, revisions. And it, you know, it sounds like there might be three sets of revisions unless if we're, basically saying, okay, we're adopting these revisions, and then I'm not sure exactly what the procedure would be. Maybe we wouldn't adopt them officially and adopt them all at once. I think an appealing part of it, though, is from having gone through and done a full red line, doing the full red line all at once, at least if, you're a lawyer like me, there's going to be a lot of red. So, my concern, and I emailed this to Sean and Jonathan after I had started, was kind of like, I don't want to like have this just, sea of red in this document, and then, we're giving it over to the board and everyone's like, what is going on here? So that aspect of it does make me, kind of agree that a phased approach might make sense, where we, deal with the virtual stuff first, and anything else that we think is really top of the, on the top of issues. I think Sean mentioned the like hiring issues that are addressed in the bylaws could be cleaned up, certainly. So that's something we could try to tackle right away. So it is a possible approach, rather than what I was suggesting, basically breaking the bylaws into 3 and dealing with it all at once. So I'm happy to open it up to comments. I see Glenn, you have your hand up.
Well, Steve, if I may, before we go on.
Go ahead, John.
Maybe this is a good time to take Nikki's suggestion up. Is there a way for us to do a screen share with a document for us to sort of just lay out where we are in this conversation as we identify issues, so we can at least just start jotting them down, or build off of the document that was sent out? I don't know if that's possible, Anya or Sean, if we could do that.
I mean, are we there yet? I thought that you're still sort of sussing out the approach and to start looking at the document and start tackling it before we know which way we're going. See,
as a way to whatever we do decide that we all can see as we kind of agree to it, like what the list is. I'm just asking about that. If it doesn't seem feasible right now to do that, or we don't have a technical capability of doing that right now, then that's fine. I just wanted to know, because I do think that might help for us to see it and all be on the same page about, oh, okay, this is what we want to put on the to-do list this week.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, misunderstood. I thought you wanted the actual bylaws open.
No, not the bylaws. Either the document that you sent out, which has sort of the summary of the proposed changes that we definitely want to discuss as part of this process, or even as sort of a blank document, and then we'll kind of just tack on those things as they come up. I don't know if you agree with that approach, Steve. If you think that would be helpful at this point.
I think it might, if we are considering the phased approach, and it sounds like it's at the very least it's under consideration, it would be helpful to know what the phase 1 would actually include. So I think we, virtual meeting, making sure it's adapted to virtual meetings. I think tackling the hiring practices, something that Sean mentioned that she thought should be addressed right away.
At least, even if we don't do a phased approach, at least to rank and prioritize the issues that we need to deliberate on. Just even if it is 1 phase or 3 phases, we at least can rank them, and then we'll decide how to go about tackling them, I think, going forward. Either way, to have that visually in front of us, I think.
So I have a question for the committee, and then based on the answer, then I'm wondering, Anya, if this is possible. And so it sounds like there's 3 approaches, right? We have the phased approach, we have the top down, and then we have by issue. And so my thinking is, I can just open up a Word doc and I can just create a matrix, and it would be basically a 3x4 matrix. The first column is the option numbers. The second one is the summary. The third column says pro. The fourth says con. And if Anya can give me the ability to share my screen, I can just put that up. We can fill that out. And then ideally, by the end of this meeting, we as a group have determined which option we're going to go with.
Okay.
But before we do that, though, because the phase would really depend on the issues we're going to tackle. To Joanne's point, she was suggesting handling the digital meeting component to our processes, because that might take higher urgency. And so there's a point to that. So I think maybe before we decide how to break it down into phases, maybe just listing all the issues and prioritizing them at least first. Then we could, I think, with a clearer vision of what we need to do going forward, then maybe we could decide how we want to either phase it or otherwise handle it. So I think we could list out the issues before we decide the exact approach, because that should indicate to us what we need to do next and then how to proceed from there. That's what I think that might be the correct precursor step to what you just said there, Veronica.
Anya, can you do that? Can you share a screen to get that document up? My share is grayed out. I can't do it from here.
So what I was just texting individually to people, just to let you guys know, I can share my screen as the host, or I can pass on the host privileges to anyone else that would like to be the host, and we can move that privilege around. Right now, at this point, what I could share is the web-based, what's posted on our website. In order to put that into a Word document, I'm sure that I have that, but I just can't promise I could do it within 1 second. So if you wanted a Word document that then you wanted me to type notes into, I could do that. I would just need like a minute or two to get that open. So I could also pass it to someone else. Those are the options at this point.
If a board member could take that on, I would be more comfortable with that, just because, Anya, because you're still like dealing with the meeting itself, the platform.
Great. So would anyone like to volunteer to open up a Word document? And then there's a couple options. We posted already, I posted in the chat, the link that's already been a little bit marked up by Sean, Nikki, and Steve. Sean, I think, combining Nikki and Steve's comments. Or I can just post a link. I can put a Word document into our Google folder and post a link to that. Let me know however you would be most comfortable and who wants to do that.
I'm happy to share my screen. I think I have the document open that we were working from, and at the very least in terms of having the identified issues.
Great. So I'm going to make you the host. Give me 1 second, and then you'll have the share button. We'll open up for you. 1 second, please.
Can I just make a point annoying about Google Docs? Please don't kill me. Right now we have two things. We have the bylaws, right? And then we have, and thank you very much, Sean and Anya, like a compilation of the edits that Steve and I, or the things that Steve and I noted. And for me, what would be the best option would be the bylaws with the things Steve and I noted as comments on them, which you can do in Google. And I would happily volunteer to like combine those two things. It's just then you're working, like a Torah scholar with the original text and almost like a clear layer over it. Because otherwise I feel like you're always trying to like juggle two things and be like, okay, Steve said this, that's section 1. Where's section 1? Everyone's faces look sorry.
I'm trying to figure out how to share, so but I hear you.
But if anybody who knows what I mean in Google Docs knows what I'm trying to say.
The problem is all of us.
Yes, Nikki, I know.
The problem is that all of us who have read through the bylaws have our lists. We didn't submit them, but we can't overlay 10 or 12 or 15 of them. And why should we pick any one to overlay?
You actually could in Google Docs.
Yeah, but that just make things much too complicated. That's why what we did the last time was very simple. We started in category 1 and we talked about it. We come to a consensus. When we come to a consensus, then Sean or Anya make a note of it, and then they work on the specific language that fits what we all agree on. Then we move to the next section and the next section, as opposed to starting off with this huge compilation of what everybody thinks in advance. Everyone will get a chance to have their input on each item as we get to it, but there's a limit to how much you can put on the screen that makes sense.
Right, but like if all of you go, like some of the things Steve and I noted are super duper obvious, especially when it comes to the virtual meeting. So if we did that, you all might go and go, oh, that's a good point. And then there wouldn't be 17 other people adding 17 of the same comment. But I guess it's okay, but I think we're losing out on the power of Google Docs a little bit, but it's okay.
I mean, again, I think the point here is that at least for this level, let's just list out the things that we know we have to tackle. Doesn't matter what the specific languages in the bylaws at this moment. We need to know what we're going to be zooming in on and paying attention to. So everything else that we need to do, whether it's section by section, a thorough rereading, whatever the case may be, marking up for one particular issue we have to address, whatever it is, we at least know what the agenda really is going forward for this round of bylaws revision. So again, high level, all these ideas are useful and they're really good. I think once we get sort of like, okay, these are the, whatever, 7 items that are issues we must tackle as part of this round of revision, then we can figure out whatever is the most useful for everybody to do the job that needs to be done. That's what I think. Okay. That's, I think, where we go with that. And I think Steve is a presenter now. I think
I'm trying, but still having issues. Is there anyone else who has their hand up, Jonathan, that we need to call on? I'm gonna look. Anne might have had her hand up before. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I do actually.
Okay.
So,
go ahead, Ann.
My understanding, you're right, Jonathan, that you're suggesting that everyone simply submit their ideas and somebody compiles them all into a list?
We're going to do that. We want to do that now. Like, what are, in other words, high level. Do we have a problem with virtual meetings? Our bylaws provide a process for our annual elections that makes it sound like it has to be done in person. And there's some answers in Robert's rules for that, but we're going to be confronted with doing an election entirely virtually. So do we need to come up with an answer for that? Is that something we have to rush through? Yes or no? Great, that goes on the list. We know that there's
Okay, but how do we do that?
Policy.
So what I'm process. How do we get that information to you? I'm asking for process.
We're gonna.
So I can tell you right now. Item number 7, number 3 is specifically where the language would go to include something to do with WebEx.
We're gonna make note. The process is we're going to write it all down now. Specific language could be submitted for the next.
How are you getting this stuff to write down?
That's
what you want us to just verbally tell you? Do you want us to put it in an email? How are we going to get the information to you?
We're going to write down the high level issue. That's what Steve is working on, is presenting, so we could all look at those issues together. We're going to go around and whatever issues we have to list out.
How is Steve getting the issues that he's writing down? Process.
From us talking at this meeting right now.
That was from Sean's email earlier that I updated based on some comments that were raised.
That's part of it. The rest of us.
And then we'll be able to add it right now. And then we can add it right now in this meeting. So you can say
Jonathan.
it, Ann can say it, Carl Henry can say it, Nikki can say it.
And Glenn, I think
down, and then we're going to write.
I'm hearing your question, Glenn. But I think the answer to your question is yes. You will just say what you would like to add to the list, and Steve will type it into the document that he's trying to bring up on the screen.
Okay, then I just have 2 things.
Can I say something?
Go ahead.
What Nikki suggested, the Google Docs. With Google Docs, we all can type into the document what we all want and want into the one document, which would make it easier instead of having Steve, try to add into it. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Google Docs, because it's something that I use daily, and that seems to work.
Since Steve has the list of issues up right now, could we maybe go ahead with that part of the process and then kick it over to Nikki? And so for the next meeting, this is the high level overview, and the next meeting, this committee will have decided how you want to move forward with the approach, and maybe Nikki would volunteer to have the Google Doc that would incorporate decisions made tonight into the Google Doc, and that would be the second meeting. That would be the document, the second meeting and going forward. But this would just be the introductory list of issues. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah, that works.
Steve, could you zoom in your
Sorry. Yeah, I can increase the font, increase the size. Hopefully.
You should be able to. Much better.
So here were the identified issues. I added the reference to the making the quorum consistent. The two that we've identified, if we go with the phased approach, are the making are making sure the bylaws are consistent with allowing for virtual meetings. Like I think there was something about needing paper ballots for the vote for the chair and other positions. So hopefully we can modify that. And for clarifying hiring practices, I guess I can't see now if anyone has hands raised. So Jonathan, if you could deal with that part. But you know, I don't know if we want to try to identify other possible phase ones or just identify a laundry list of issues. I'm open to your approach.
I see Anne has her hand up. Anne?
You're muted, Anne.
Hi, is that better? Great,
Yep.
thank you. So thank you for sharing your screen, Steve. I don't know that I can print this out or even navigate in here. I'm kind of frozen in time with this. But as to things that I would want to insert, should I just send those to you or to Sean or Anya, to the board itself? Because it would include definition, like extensions of clarifications, I guess, missing things under certain executive board members' roles, right? Like I think the role of the secretary is not clearly fleshed out as to content and distribution process of the minutes themselves are not noted there, keeping tally, where, et cetera, things like that. The hiring process is noted, subcommittees and temporary committees. So it's sort of vaguely in there, but, and it's, you can parse together, it's, the document reads that we're not holding meetings in July and August, but it doesn't touch on the committee of the whole, which was agreed to by the members present. Voting, I believe we have permission to do virtual voting. So why are we precluded from using an email as a vote? Because it does ultimately, it's a traceable event. It's a time, date, stamp. So it's delivered and it's written by our IP. So we may be able to, so there were other quorum issues I'm not going to touch because they're as Sean defined. But there are a bunch of things here that I have personally on my notes that I started to write out, and one of them is a facade thing, and that's it kind of annoys me. The letter the board members or board is alternates. Generally, it's a small b, but then there's a capital B on occasion. So I think it would be nice if we had things like that sorted out just for continuity. And I mean, there's a bunch of other things as well, but I'm not able to sort of navigate this document. And I don't know that I can capture it to even make secondary comments and submit them for inclusion.
So Anne, what you just did right now was exactly what we're looking to do at this point. And this document is going to go out to everybody. We're using it to itemize the broad changes we're looking to make that everyone here wants to suggest. And then we're going to use it to figure out how we want to tackle that list, what's going to get priority over what, and then how we're going to move forward with them. So that if you do have very specific language, or let's say you have a couple of ideas, let's say related to quorum, when we're going to actually deal with the quorum section, let's say, then you could email it in advance of the meeting, whatever the case is, we'll figure that part out. But what you just did is exactly what we're looking to do. And so if there's any other high-level topics that you didn't suggest, let's get them in now. And this way we have it on the list as we go forward and go through everybody else's suggestions.
Okay, so did you want me to finish my list or no? Because I mean, I don't know that it's being captured anywhere.
Oh, you don't see his screen right now? He's typing it in as.
I'm jotting him down as I hear him.
Okay. So let me see. So in election of officers, given that we now have term limits, and there's only those members who exist for the prior year, if I'm reading this correctly, are able to be, previously we've done a slate of officers and they've sort of been advanced as a slot vacates, correct? So because of the nature of the line item referendum or wherever it came from for the term limiting of board members, I don't think that we need to update that section because we can't just advance the slate. On one section, it says you must be there for a year, right? So that's now you're senior, right? So I think that needs to be addressed and it shouldn't take long. Below that one, the initial first several pages I'm absolutely fine with, by the way. So the way it's written, I mean, it may be modified, but I'll leave that to others. Below election of officers, members at large, B, it says, my question is, can this include email notice, which is also known as written notice, right? So I think we can integrate being compelled to provide written notice, whether it's for vote or other, by using hopscotching or piggybacking from some of these existing language points, right? Unless we want to pull them out and make them a separate and distinct item. I leave that out there. In terms of the board officer under the secretary, where are we? Hold on, under the chair. There was one or two things here. So the language of under the board chair, H reads this way, all right? So it says to authenticate all acts, orders, proceedings of the board, including the countersigning of all letters, whatever nature going out from the board. And I wonder if it shouldn't say of all letters of whatever nature. I mean, it's a small edit, but it clarifies. And then the subsequent I, so that's H. So I, there's a redundancy on the word B. I think that the second B could be deleted. So it says to appoint, consult with, suspend, or remove chairpersons of all committees as may be from time to time be deemed. So I think it could be amended to read from time to time deemed necessary. It's a small edit, but it's like
So-
little cleanups like that. So what do you want the small things in?
Well, I think
We have a section
Sorry.
for that too. We do have a section for clearing up typos and grammatical errors. I believe that's one of the first ones that are already on the list, right?
Mhm.
Something about
I mean, we could just.
something about language, but yeah, there's a lot of language changes. And by the way, Steve had started that process and did a fantastic job already of cleaning up a lot of that. So in fact, the things that you mentioned, I'm looking at the document that he had sent out earlier, and he already had those changes made that he's ready to propose whenever it's already time, when it's the correct time to do it.
May I jump
go
in
ahead,
on
Sean.
some housekeeping matters? Thank you. Right, I think that's exactly it, that if the cleanup of the language and just consistency should be in the final draft. I want to sort of encourage the committee to think about, I don't think that some of these sections are going to take a lot of discussion. Some of them are going to be easy peasy. So I'd like to suggest that you do try to take this on in one fell swoop. And if we get to a section that seems like it's going to be sticky, it could be tabled so that the first go at the it could be a finalization of the, I'm sorry, I'm not being articulate now, which is another thing I'd like to make sure that we do hard stops at 2 hours so that we're not going past an hour and a half too often, but no more than 2. But also, I'm just thinking about how many other committee meetings we have to schedule by the end of the year and upcoming public hearings as well. So to the extent that there can be a deadline set on what this first go through should hit before it gets presented to the board, and then anything that is still under discussion can be tabled I think might be another way of going about it. And maybe that sounds like, maybe that's the same as phases, but I'd like to at least try to get through the whole thing. And if we have to phase two some discussions through that, then do that accordingly.
Okay. I think, yeah, I'm open-minded as to either approach. I guess again, the reason why I found the phase one approach possibly appealing was more that, just having done a first pass, just seeing, all the edits, I was just worried about like having to then say like, oh, okay, like we did this and that, and it might be hard to like, it just might be overwhelming. So, but I'm totally open if we want to do section by section, issue by issue, or the phased approach that Joanne and Carl suggested.
Yeah, I didn't mean to go on that long as if I felt that deeply about it. But I guess what I was really thinking and what I forgot to say is that there's nothing that's stopping us from functioning now. Even if we do something that isn't in the bylaws because there's an executive order saying that we have to meet remotely, I don't know that the bylaws place is going to arrest anybody on the spot. We've got the executive order as sort of cover for going around the bylaws in very practical situations like voting.
I didn't see a provision that said the Public Safety Committee chairs get to arrest people for not following the bylaws, so I think we're okay.
Yeah, we've got a lot of jokes about the charter police in community board world.
So, Jonathan, does anyone have their hand up? Anyone, or Jonathan, do you want to raise anything?
No, I think we're on a good path. I mean, obviously, if the issue that you want to highlight has already been written down, and there isn't anything original in terms of nuance to offer, then let's consider that on the list because it has been noted. I see Nikki, Joe, and Glenn. So, Nikki, do you want to go?
Sure. I just think I agree with what Sean was saying. Like, just from having observed the way this conversation is going now, I happen to think that just walking through the document would be a better approach. Because I think trying to tackle it in phases virtually and with digital documents might get really complicated. So this is my vote for going from the top to the bottom of the document and just tackling it section by section. I also think it might move faster. That's just my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Nikki. Joe?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we're getting far afield, and I think that the top-down is the right way. We need to do it that way. Frankly, I'm not comfortable with this Google Documents thing. I've never seen it before, and I'm not comfortable trying to read it. With all due respect to everybody, this venue of Zoom is supposed to, as best we can, try to replace in-person meetings. And at those in-person meetings, I want to hear why Nikki likes a particular thing. I need to hear her reason behind a particular sentence that she might have written. So I need to hear it, not just read it. It's a little bit dry if I just read it. So I need to hear Nikki's or Ann's reason or Joanne's reason behind it. So I missed that, and I want to have that give and take, and I think top-down might be the best way to do it. Thanks.
Okay, Glenn, I think you're next.
Yes, Joe pretty much said what I wanted to say, because going this direction, Anne has some very good points, but the way that Steve wrote them out doesn't help us at all. Because you would need to know specifically, not negative for you, Steve, it's this process, this approach, because I could put my list down and Joe could put his list down, and next thing you know, we've got 50 different things here, none of which is being specific as to which item. So, for example, one of my items is number 7, meetings, subcategory 3. Now, if you don't write that down, that number 7 meetings, category 3, my comment can go anywhere. And the only way we can do that easily is simply starting at number 1 and just work it through. And as Joe said, then we make our comments and we all agree that the language is either good the way it is, or we make the changes on that specific line, and then we move on to the next one. Thank you.
And based on the last three comments, I'm wondering if we should say, basically, we schedule a meeting sometime in March and, try to go through sections 1 through 4, and solicit, comments and edits in advance of the meeting, and, just kind of go through line by line or issue by issue and just kind of tackle it, and then, do 5 through 8 the next time, 9 through 12 the next time. Does that sound like a reasonable approach for everyone?
But before we do that, though, there are some things that need to be addressed that aren't even in the bylaws. So I think while there are definitely micro changes that are very specific, they are all meant to achieve a certain outcome. And I think we should just list out what are the changes that people are concerned with, or the things that they're concerned with. So that way we know what to pay attention to when we do the reading the next time. Again, none of this is precluding process. None of this is going to be in a Google Doc land where if you're not familiar with Google Docs, you're not going to be able to read it or process it. This is just facilitating, because we're in virtual meeting land, just so that we can all see what are the concerns that people have, and then we can decide what we want to focus on, whether we do it top down, whether we do it issue by issue, whatever the case is. I kind of wanted to, personally, what I want to see is what everybody is concerned with, making sure we discuss as part of this, so that way we can make an informed decision about what we're going to tackle next. And again, we could just list everything out, organize it next time by its ordering in the bylaws, and then we'll go. Okay, issue 5, 10, and 15 is all related to membership. Let's get through it and talk it out. But just to see what are the specific things that people have in mind, or the higher level issues. I think we need to know that, because some of it may not already be in the bylaws. Therefore, reading the bylaws as a way to come to those conclusions may not be the sufficient way to get to those answers. So that's why I would propose that we continue with this approach. But of course, look, if the vast majority of you think it would work better another way, then so be it. But again, I think the rationale here is just put down on paper or digital paper what everybody's concerns are, and then we can do all these other things as we move forward. But that makes sense to me and has worked for me in the past. But again, that may not necessarily be true for everybody.
If I might respect that, if somebody has some idea that isn't specifically already listed in the bylaws, that's fine. But they should be able to figure out which category it goes into. Does it go into meetings or membership? And when we get to that category, whether it's 2, 3, 7, 9, whatever it is, then they bring it up and say, okay, under C, we should add some language that doesn't yet exist. This is not complicated. Because anyone who's got an idea of what they want to do should have an idea of how it fits into the existing structure of the bylaws. We don't have to know this all in advance. We get to number 2, have something at number 2, you speak up and we read number 2. As long as we all agree with it. Right? Just because someone has an idea doesn't mean the rest of us are going to necessarily agree. But if we agree, then it gets handed.
You mean like Joe Dweck's Scotch idea? Not everybody seemed to agree with that, Joe.
Well, okay. How about
folks,
are there any other high-level issues that have not been?
No, just give the Scotch. We'll discuss it after.
high level
Are there any other
hierarchy
high-level issues that haven't been recorded yet?
Jonathan, the issue of high level and whose high level is this and whose high level is that is going to be a bone of contention in and of itself. So therefore, you then have to go and get agreement of what should be hierarchy and not hierarchy. You might as well just go through one from Aleph through to Z.
But to that point, if there is something more important than other things, we need to also decide that. We have to have visibility in that. We don't want to wait for something related to hiring practices, which it may have a more urgent implication, because that's at the very end of the bylaws at the moment about the district manager's office, because we're stuck debating something related to the roles of community board elected officers. And so that's why I'm proposing we do this approach. And honestly, look, if this is already reflective of everybody's major concerns, then we could close this portion. If there are other major concerns that are not already entailed by any of the things that have been spoken already, then let's list them out. just so that way we have that visibility going into the process. So I would just say, let's all of you really don't agree. Let's just go through and see if there's anything else we need to add to the list, and then we could decide whatever way makes sense for everyone to proceed from there.
I'll start off there. I think there's something in the election section 4C about if there occurs a vacancy in any office except that of chairperson, then the said office shall be filled by a majority vote of the executive committee. But I don't think there was a reference to what happens about the chairperson vacancy. So that, and then there's the vote, the way the voting works, there's nothing that says, there's no tiebreaker provision. So if people get the same number, it just says the person receiving the highest number of votes for each office shall be deemed elected. So I think just, to protect ourselves, we just need to come up with some mechanism for if there happens to be a tie in any sort of vote. So I'll add those two.
Oh, I like those. And Robert's rules.
It's language in there that says if the chairmanship becomes vacant, it is filled by the first vice chair for the remainder of the term. That's in the bylaws.
Okay.
And that is another thing where it's like I don't know, where things are arranged is a little funky.
Thanks, Sean.
There's nothing in the New York City Community Board bylaws that address our own bylaws of hierarchies or first vice chair, all that stuff. It's completely not in the city charter. It's something that is only in our own bylaws.
Yeah, but Joe, that every community board has a set of officers. So that's one of those things that each community board decides whatever works for them. So the fact that we have that structure is up to us. Anybody else? Anybody else in hearing after you said? I see Carl Henry's got his hand up. Carl, do you want to say something?
Yes, please. Give me a second. Let me just lower my hand. Okay, cool. Yeah. So basically, I did go through the bylaws first pass, and basically, I'm going to summarize my comments. So let's just put it this way. I have a question about the scope of the community board listed in section 2. I have a question about the criteria for removing a board member in section 3. I have a question about, voting in the time of COVID, as several people have mentioned, for section 4. And I also have a question about the topical committees per section 6. So let's just summarize it that way.
So the first one you said was what again? It was a question related to.
I have a question about scope.
Scope?
Yes.
What's the question about scope?
So specifically, I was thinking of amending the language to say advise, so specifically section 2B, advise the borough president, elected officials, city agencies, and third parties with respect to any matter relating to the welfare of the district and its residents. And so section 2B specifically lists city planning. It doesn't say anything about city elected officials. It doesn't say anything about third parties. And so specifically, I was thinking take out city planning, add elected officials, add third parties, and just make it so that, hey, any of these entities. So that specifically is what I was talking about for 2B.
So broadening how we provide that function.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything specific related to the removal clause?
Yes. So basically, my thing was I was looking at that section and I was wondering if there should be a 3G. And basically the 3G would go to, decorum or stuff like that. Because from when I was reading the section of section 3, all of it was related to either attendance or conflict of interest, right? But there was nothing I saw in terms of decorum. So I was thinking, hey, we could decide this as a group, but basically should there be a 3G to account for decorum? Because I can be someone who attends all the meetings and has no conflict of interest, and I'm still up, when it comes to dealing with my fellow members. And so that was my thinking for 3G.
Okay.
For 4, so that was that one right there.
So
I was wondering, should there be an additional section? Yeah, should there be, right? That's the question, right? And if so, that would be a 3G because there is no section 3G in the bylaws, right?
Okay, so, but that's a legit proposal there. And then
Yeah.
what was your last one? Because that was the one that I also think. Oh, you had a question about the
Sure.
topic.
So,
You got a concern, right?
yes. So basically for section, I was thinking of section 6C2 for the topical committees. I was thinking, hey, should we have 2 bullets? So a topical committee on diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, and then also should we have one on housing? Yes, right. So basically, yeah, exactly. So those were my suggestions. Yeah.
So add topical committees on diversity, inclusion, and a separate one on housing?
Correct. And then that could be a discussion of, hey, can you really have them separately? But that's basically my thinking for those. Yeah.
No, right, but that's the high level proposal is to maybe consider adding.
Precisely. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Is there anything else that you want to be more specific or in terms of the outcome of the change, or is that? I think we covered it.
No, that's it. Like that was my first pass, and those were the main things that stuck out. And so this is going to be an iterative process. And so as we go through, we'll go deeper into things. But yeah, those were my things the first pass that I went into it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andre. I really appreciate your thoughtful proposal. Okay, let's see. I think I see Joe Dweck's hand. I don't know if that's from before.
Quickly, actually, in purposes, we're missing the main purpose of the community board, which is service delivery. It's not even listed here.
But that's the district manager's office job, and it is listed in the district manager part.
Well, it's the board as service delivery issue.
Well, if we could add that down and to clarify the role.
Also about the members' duties in 3, I have a very, very big bone of contention that people will sometimes represent themselves as community board members and represent the community board, and they have no authority to do that. And I want to make sure that one of the things we address is that unauthorized representation of the community board.
That's already in there, Joe.
I'm sorry.
Actually, I think clarified in the last revision because I believe that concern was raised back then. And I believe that it says something to the effect that if you're going to speak publicly, but you're not authorized to, you can't identify yourself as a community board member.
It's not on my. It's not on the version that I have.
Yeah, let me just see. I know that I remember this provision.
Section 3E, it looks like, right?
That is, yeah, I believe that is correct. Yes.
There have been other comments about clarifying the language in there, so keep it on the list.
And that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. If there needs to be more clarity, then that's a perfectly fine proposal.
Only saying in with government bodies, but people will tend to be on chats, newspapers, or whatever public forums and identify themselves as community board members and therefore speaking as a community board, it has to be reined in.
Yeah, Joe, that is on the list, and it includes social media.
Okay, so we'll write that down, make sure it's there. Okay, thank you, Joe. Any other hands up, any other proposals at this point? Anything urgent, if anything, because again, as we go through it, as Joe suggested, we certainly can add things as we go. And as Andre said, it's going to be an iterative process, and that is true. But anything high level that we want to get. Oh, Anne, I think I see your hand.
Yeah.
Oh, you're on mute. Wait, we don't hear you yet. Wait, Anne, you're on mute stuff. There you go.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Sorry. So under 6 committees, which is page 4, I'd like to see it tightened up in a maybe more actionable way. I came up with some rough language that I'll read you the section and then where I'd like to see an insert for clarification maybe. So it says here, the executive committee shall include the officers and the 2 members at large of the board. In emergency situations, the executive committee may act on behalf of the board, provided the same is not contrary to previously stated positions of the board, and providing that any such action shall be ratified by board membership at the next regular meeting. If not so ratified, I'd like the opportunity here to insert a clause that gives the members present the opportunity to be able to table it at least once so that it can then be reviewed and finalized at a subsequent meeting. So the language I roughed out was, if not so ratified, and this would be an insert here, it is to be tabled. The matter may be reviewed at a subsequent meeting. If ratification is not achieved, the matter will be determined to be null and void. And then you revert back to, there shall be no further implementation of the action after such meeting, and steps taken must be taken to withdraw such action where possible. So I would like to have that ability to review, because, you know, it may become necessary. It may be a welcome thing. And then if we're in the weeds with things, where the
high level, so just answer high level.
What is high level, Jonathan?
So high level is debatable. Hiring is important. These are all important considerations. So I can't access this thing that Steve is or someone is typing into. So I can't go up and down. I can't capture this. So I would appreciate if it could be forwarded by email. That would really be helpful.
Yes. And you will.
But I'm not clear if we're going to have a vote on, do we want to do a phased in approach where some members have been supportive of, other members have been less supportive of? Or do we want to do a take it from the top? And I stuck in a chat something along the lines of, for our particular issues that we identify, it may be helpful if there is some language that comes forward with it so that it may expedite. We can adopt it, we can amend it, we can dismiss it. But that it gives us an opportunity to have a starting place so that it's not just throwing ideas out and leaving the language to everybody else. It's your idea, put it forward. So those are some of the things that I wanted to pop in here with. But I think it would be helpful if we could determine Joanne's suggestion, which has merit, but then there's merit too from taking from the top. This is not that, you know, there are things here that do need to be changed, you know, so, but high level I think is a bit more vague term, to me at least. Thank you.
No, I was just trying to clarify your point when I was saying high level. High level, you want to explicitly prescribe that normal parliamentary procedures should be invoked to table ratification in the event it needs more time to be considered. That was literally the point of what I was just trying to say. Whatever the high level outcome is,
Glenn, I think people in my generation and your generation would say something like overview or just bullet points. I think that's what high level. That's what the kids say now. They say high level.
And I'm hardly
understand the concept.
If I want to point out that it is 7:58, and if the co-chairs want to sort of maybe try to wrap up how we're going to proceed at the next meeting, and we'll take any additional high-level bullet point overview comments via email to add to this list that will be circulated to the committee.
Yeah, I think after hearing everyone, I think, you know, where I'm leaning is to basically go from the top and, you know, address sections 1 through 4 at the aim to address sections 1 through 4 at the next meeting, and we can take the issues that were identified that pertain to sections 1 through 4 and, you know, try to, you know, those will be the top of the list for the next meeting, and we can also circulate any proposed red lines or comments in advance of the meeting and identify maybe issues that you know, people are coming out a little differently that we flag for discussion at the next meeting. I think that would be my preferred approach based on what I'm hearing. What do you think, Jonathan?
No, I mean, I think we have the list of what people are most interested in and the things that it seems like we need to address. So in going about that process, I think we have clarity about what should be drafted for that meeting. And especially for you're saying articles 1 through 4, is that what you mean? Articles 1 through 4?
Yeah.
The Bylaws?
Yep.
So then anything that was put on here that certainly has to be priority, we should have the wording drafted for those particular issues, specifically if they go into articles 1 through 4. And at least we have visibility now. And again, if there's anything that needs to take precedence over the other changes, is there anything urgent? That's the only thing I would ask everyone to consider at this moment. So that way, if we do have to focus out of sync with the flow of the bylaws as written, so that way we make sure we've given adequate time and consideration to a more pressing issue, that we're able to do that. And we know that going into the next meeting.
Let's do as Steve said, 1 through 4. If there's an exigent circumstance, we'll address it.
So can we maybe like at least as a tentative plan say, 1 through 4 in March, 5 through 8 in April, and 9 through 12 in May, and then if we needed a wrap up in June, and then I guess at that point we would have we would propose the amendment to, assuming we're all on board, then we propose the amendment I guess in the September meeting. That seems like the approach we're thinking of, unless if there's some issue with meeting on a month, unless if there's some problem with meeting on a monthly basis. But that sounds like best way to proceed is based on what I'm hearing.
If I might suggest that you might want to add a time limit. So an hour and a half, 2 hours, something along those lines, so that if we don't get through all of 4, we know at a certain time we're going to call it a day. On the other hand, it is possible we'll go through a section and be able to move on to 5. Maybe things will move more quickly. So let's not limit it too tightly so we can try to get through this.
Okay. Well.
And you're muted.
So I hope that's better. I'm so sorry about this. I'm getting it backwards. It's the left-handed side of me. So Joanne raised a really an important point that was supported by some members. So I personally do agree myself. If I were to vote, I would vote for the top to bottom. But I would like to hear if that is a solid endorsed by the bulk of the members present, so that it's not just ignored. I think that there was support for it.
What if there's a hybrid model that you do top to bottom, but if anybody has an issue that they think is completely burning, that they raise it at the next mission, the 1 through 4 meeting, and say, while this is number 5, I think it's so incredibly burning, we need to add it to this agenda, and then we'll take it that way. But I just don't see that there should be anything that's that urgent, because we could just not have a bylaws review committee. Right? This came up from a conversation between board members, and we would still function as a board. There's nothing that is keeping us from functioning the way they're written now. This is an improvement going forward, but there's nothing that should be so burning, because we can still do what we're doing.
So let's say our March meeting will do 1 through 4. I'm looking at the bylaws. I'm seeing that 5 through 7 are a little more meaty. So let's do 5 through 7 in April. Let's plan to do 5 through 7 in April, assuming we finish up with 4 to Glenn's point, and then 8 through 12, because most of those are pretty short. Those would be for the May meeting. So I think that's good for a tentative approach. And yeah, we'll go from there. And like we said, we'll circulate, proposed edits and comments, and highlight the issues that we think need to be tackled in advance of each meeting.
Bravo.
Yeah, and then we'll send out the list of these issues, and so if any of them are entailed in 1 through 4 for the next meeting, have your proposed revision ready, so that way we can consider it right off the bat. And if you see a duplicate and you want to work on it, I know we didn't write down who said what, but I'm sure we could figure that out. And so if there's any collaboration, I think that we would be able to put you in touch with the right person if you share a passion for any of the issues that were written down here, but you weren't the one to have made it. So either way, you'll get your chance to meet him anyway.
And does the committee wish to try to maintain these meetings at the very beginning of the month, so that they can be reported out at the regular monthly meeting?
That makes sense.
I agree.
We'll do our best
So
to do
moved.
that.
All right, Jonathan, I can't see if there are any hands. Otherwise, I'd propose to adjourn unless if there's anything else.
I see Nikki has her hand up. If there's anything, I don't know if that's still true.
I do have my hand up, and I just want to very humbly, to the two gentlemen who are chairs, beat my dead horse one last time. I know that not all, I was wrong to just be like Google Docs, as if everybody knows what a Google Doc is, very comfortable working with them. But if you've never seen Google Docs before, I do really feel that it could literally save us hours of work. Even if it was even if all that we did was see the way that you're sharing your screen right now, instead of using a Word document, we use that. People could make real text changes and add comments. It would be, so for instance, we agreed that for the next meeting, we were going to do sections 1 through 4. Everybody on the committee could have access to a document, and they would be able to put their feedback into one place. We'd be able to open it up on the screen and then walk point by point through that feedback. So we'd have a shared marked up document. So I just want to make one sort of last plea for that. I would be super happy to, even if you're not familiar with Google Docs, to show you how it works. We could show it on the screen, and the chairs can feel free to be like, Nikki, it's done, shut up, it's over. I just feel that it would really be a great tool for this committee to use, and would save us a lot of time, and it would be the most collaborative. Joe and Glenn were talking about that, feeling like you're in the room with people. It would really bring back a little bit of that feeling. So just one last plea for that. I'm happy to give a tutorial on how it works and help facilitate its use, but it really would be an efficient way to do this review process with many people and having your all voices heard equally.
Thank you, Nikki.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to consider it. I'm I use it. I use Google Docs sometimes. And I see the upside to it. I guess there's I'm just thinking through, like, if there's folks that are less familiar. No, I think it's a point well taken. I think we should take that into consideration, whether to move to a master Google Doc for the next meeting.
If it goes up at the next meeting and people take a look and they get comfortable with it, then we can move it along. If it goes up at the next meeting and Nikki, Nikki's sharing her screen and, think the updates are going in real time, but, people don't feel comfortable with it and don't feel like it's facilitating the process, then, it's not like we can't turn back.
Anyone else have any comments? I can't see the hands.
Nope, I think that's it for now. Unless Nikki raised her hand again, but I don't think so. But did you? I don't think so. I think it's just up from before. So I think that's it. There's no more discussion at this moment. Oh, Nikki, did you? Sorry.
No, I didn't. I swear.
Oh, okay, all right, okay. Sorry, because it was just there, and then I saw you unmuted yourself, and I was. So no, there are no other hands raised.
All right, so I think with that, we can adjourn for now, and we'll regroup in March, and everyone check your emails and potentially, in whatever form, either attached document or Google Doc if we're feeling ambitious, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night now.
Thanks, everyone. Good
Thanks,
night.
everyone, especially
Meeting
Chair.
adjourned.